My dad had been in Kuwait for 10 years, yet my mom still dressed up every night and waited for someone. Around midnight, an 18-year-old boy would come to meet my mom. I was always curious, and one day, I hid in my room to watch. What I saw made my heart drop because my mom was with this 18-year-old boy fulfilling her desires. I was stunned as I watched my mom standing in front of the mirror, getting ready once again. I had gone to her room to ask her something, but when I saw her, I froze. She turned around startled by my presence and said, "What are you doing here? Why aren't you in your room sleeping?" There was a sharpness in her tone. I looked at her in confusion, unable to understand why she was angry, as I hadn't done anything to upset her. I softly asked, "Mom, what's going on?" "I just came to ask if Dad's called. I haven't spoken to him since this morning." She glanced at me and said, "No, your dad hasn't called today. I'll call him myself tomorrow morning and let you talk to him. Now go back to your room and sleep." But I couldn't hold it in and asked, "Mom, why are you getting so dressed up? It's almost midnight." I looked at the clock, and it was 11 p.m. She replied, "What's wrong with me getting ready? I want to wear nice clothes too. Just because your dad isn't here doesn't mean I should sit around crying all the time." Her tone was tinged with bitterness, like my question had offended her. I quickly went to her and hugged her arm, saying, "Oh, my dear Mom, I didn't mean it like that. I was just surprised that you're getting ready this late. If you want to get dressed up, you can do that. It's your choice." Hearing my words, a soft smile appeared on her face, and she said, "So what if your dad isn't here? I have desires too. I want to feel good about myself, so that's why I get ready at night. Don't worry about me and go to bed. You know the exams are starting tomorrow, right?" I nodded, agreeing to her point, and began to leave the room. But then she called out to me, "Make sure to lock your room door from the inside. Tomorrow, I'll talk to your dad for you." I nodded again, went to my room, and locked the door. But as I tried to study, my mind wandered. I couldn't concentrate on my studies because I kept thinking about Dad. It had been so many years since Dad left. I was only 3 when he went to Kuwait, and now 10 years had passed. I was 13 years old, and still, Dad hadn't returned. I didn't even know if he intended to come back. He would call us regularly, checking in and asking how we were, but our conversations were brief. He rarely spoke to me for long, and even with Mom, the conversations were short. Yet he called every day without fail. I closed my eyes and imagined Dad coming back home and us living a normal life together. It was my biggest wish for him to return. I longed to spend time with both of them, just like my friends did with their parents. We weren't lacking money. Dad sent back a good amount from Kuwait every month, but the emptiness of Dad's absence in my life was something money couldn't fill. Whenever my friends told me how they went shopping with their dads or traveled with them, my heart would sink. I felt that emptiness once again. But especially tonight, seeing my mom getting ready like this made me wish that Dad were here, so Mom wouldn't feel so lonely. Instead of preparing in the dark of night, she would be doing it in the daylight, with Dad by her side, going out together. Sometimes I was amazed by my mom's patience and strength. Despite 10 years of waiting, she never once complained to Dad. Whenever his call came, she spoke to him with patience and calmness, never asking him to return. It was always me who would argue with Dad occasionally, asking him to come back. And then he would explain his work situation and why he couldn't return, leaving me lost in thought. What kind of job could keep him away for 10 years? Lost in these thoughts, I eventually fell asleep. When I woke up the next morning and went to Mom's room, she was sleeping deeply. There were no traces of makeup on her face from the night before. I sat beside her bed, gently brushing her hair. At the touch, she woke up with a smile and asked, "What's the matter, honey? Why are you sitting here so early? Aren't you going to school? Let me make breakfast and you get ready." I replied, "Mom, you looked so beautiful last night after getting ready. Why did you wash your face? You could have just slept like that." She laughed and said, "Oh, that was just a little bit of getting ready. You're worried about such small things. Hurry up and get ready for school." I quickly ran to my room since I was running late. After having breakfast made by Mom, I stood outside waiting for the school van. Just before it arrived, our neighbor, Linda, walked quickly towards me, her face partially covered by her scarf. She approached me and quietly asked, "Grace, who was at your house last night?" Surprised, I asked, "Aunt Linda, who would come to our house at night?" "No one comes over," I answered innocently, but she suddenly jumped and said, "Oh, you're so clever. Don't want to tell me?" "Fine, don't. But I saw with my own eyes. A boy came to your house last night." "Tell me, are you seeing someone?" I was only 13 years old and I couldn't even imagine such things, yet she was directly accusing me. I was already quite angry, so in my frustration I said, "Aunt Linda, it seems like you've lost your mind. Why are you saying such nonsense so early in the morning? Don't you have anything else to do?" Aunt Linda looked me up and down and then muttered something as she turned back and went into her house. Surely she was bad-mouthing me. In the meantime, my van arrived and I got into it. Throughout the ride, I kept thinking about how Aunt Linda had completely lost it. She was always snooping around in everyone's business, and now she was after me. Mom never liked Aunt Linda either. I decided I would tell Mom about this when I got home because I was worried that Aunt Linda might start spreading other rumors about me. At school, I couldn't stop thinking about Aunt Linda's words. When I returned home, I found Mom humming while cooking. She looked happy and I tossed my bag aside and ran to hug her. She asked, "What's going on, honey? Who were you talking to outside? Your van arrived before I could even say goodbye." I was busy with the milk on the stove, so I couldn't come out. I recalled Aunt Linda's words and said, "Mom, you know, Aunt Linda really made me angry this morning. I wanted to complain to you right then and there, but I was running late for school, so I didn't have time." Mom looked surprised and asked, "Is everything all right? What did Aunt Linda want from you this morning?" I told her, she accused me of having a young boy come to our house last night. She said someone came to meet me. I got so mad after hearing that. I told her nothing like that happened. Mom's eyes widened, and she said, "Did she really say that to you?" I replied, "Yes, Mom. I'm scared she might go around telling everyone else." Mom sat down and seemed to be thinking for a moment before saying, "She's a strange and dangerous woman. She's always making up lies and spreading rumors. Next time, if she stops you to talk, don't listen to anything she says. I'll handle it and tell her plainly not to make any such accusations about my daughter." Mom's trust and support reassured me. After dinner, I went to my room to relax. A silence filled the house, and that evening, when I returned home after tutoring, I found Mom lost in thought. I asked her, "What's going on, Mom? You seem worried. Did Dad call today?" Mom shook her head and replied, "No, he didn't call today either." I thought maybe Mom was upset about that. I sat next to her and said, "Don't worry, maybe Dad is just busy. Remember, a while ago, his phone was broken, and he couldn't call for a few days." Mom nodded quietly. That night, when I went to Mom's room to say goodnight and remind her to set an alarm for the morning, I was shocked. She wasn't getting ready as usual. Instead, she was sitting quietly on her bed with a strange sadness on her face. I asked, "What's wrong, Mom? Aren't you getting ready today?" She smiled faintly, saying, "If I get ready, you get worried. If I don't, you get worried. If I'm ready, you think I'm missing Dad. If I'm not, you think I'm upset." I said, "No, Mom. I just know that you're sad because Dad hasn't called, and that worries you." Mom looked away, avoiding my gaze. I said, "Don't worry, Mom. Dad's call will come tomorrow." Mom smiled softly, and I kissed her forehead before leaving her room. As I returned to my own room, I thought about how straightforward and pure-hearted Mom was. When she was upset, you could see it on her face. And when she was happy, it was the same. I loved her so much. She had raised me with such care and affection. I fell asleep thinking about Mom. The next morning, before I left for school, I received a call from Dad. I was overjoyed to hear his voice. He apologized for not calling sooner and explained that he had been busy with work. Mom's face also lit up with relief. That day, I didn't run into Aunt Linda, but in the evening, Mr. Mark, a kind neighbor who lived at the end of the street and had been a friend of Dad's for years, stopped me. He asked, "Grace, can you tell me who comes to your house every night? Is it a relative?" This time, I was completely caught off guard. I asked, Mr. Mark, no one comes to our house at night. He said, well, I've seen it with my own eyes. For the past few days, I've been noticing a young man. For the past few days, I've been noticing a young man, about 17 or 18, entering your house around midnight. He knocks on the door before coming inside. I've never seen a relative of yours coming over, so I thought I'd ask. I was now truly shocked. Aunt Linda's gossip was one thing, but Mr. Mark was a good man, someone who couldn't possibly lie. He had been a close friend of Dad's for years and had helped us with many things, even bringing the money Dad sent back from Kuwait. Why would he lie about something like this? Mr. Mark noticed my confusion and smiled gently. Don't worry, Grace. Maybe it's just a relative of your mom's that I haven't met yet. Don't let it trouble you. When your dad calls, tell him I said hello. He smiled and walked off toward the mosque. I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of the situation. I slowly made my way home, my mind racing with thoughts. When I arrived, I saw Mom opening the door. She immediately noticed the look on my face and asked, is everything all right? You seem upset. I said, I don't know, Mom. What Aunt Linda said this morning, now Mr. Mark is saying the same thing. I don't know what to believe anymore. Mr. Mark had said the same thing today, that a boy comes to our house every night. I had no idea about any of this, and you never mentioned it. Do you know who is coming to our house every night? I looked at Mom with questioning eyes. Mom jumped in surprise and said, are you out of your mind? Who would come to our house? None of our relatives visit, and neither do your fathers. Looks like everyone in the neighborhood believes Aunt Linda's nonsense, and now they're questioning you to get some information. But don't worry, there's nothing to it. Don't ever mention this to your father, or he'll get worried and upset in Kuwait. I nodded to Mom, but I wasn't fully convinced. How could a man as good as Mr. Mark believe Aunt Linda's gossip and question me about it? Everyone knew how Aunt Linda spread rumors, but Mr. Mark was a kind and trustworthy person. It didn't make sense for him to be involved in all this. I didn't say anything more to Mom, but as I sat quietly in my room trying to study, my thoughts kept racing back to that conversation. Then that night, when I went to say goodnight to Mom, she was getting ready, really dressed up, and she had put on a new outfit. I looked at her from head to toe. She didn't seem upset, even though Dad had been away for 10 years. I wondered how she could be so full of life when Dad's absence should have left a hole in her heart. But then I realized that she too had a right to live her life. She too deserved to feel good about herself. I kissed her goodnight and went back to my room, but sleep didn't come. Then around midnight, I heard something, like the front door opening. My heart skipped a beat. I had already heard enough from Aunt Linda and Mr. Mark to make me paranoid. I quietly opened my bedroom door to peek out and saw someone walking toward Mom's room. My heart sank. Who was it? Was it the same 17 or 18-year-old boy everyone was talking about? I tiptoed toward her room, and my stomach dropped as I saw the boy sitting on Mom's bed with her. I froze. This wasn't something I had imagined. The boy was actually there with her. I rushed into the room in shock, and Mom, who was beautifully dressed, stood up in panic when she saw me. "What are you doing here? Why aren't you sleeping?" she asked, clearly rattled. I stammered, "Who is this? Mom, is this the boy Mr. Mark mentioned?" Mom immediately grabbed my hand, her face pale. "Promise me you won't tell your father about this. Promise me," she pleaded. I stepped back shaking. "Mom, first tell me the truth. Who is he? And what is he doing here? Is he the same boy Aunt Linda was talking about? But you told me back then that Aunt Linda was lying." Mom's eyes filled with tears as she sat me down and said, "My dear, I'll tell you everything, but you must promise me you won't tell your father. If you do, everything will fall apart." She started crying and I was left speechless. I said, "Okay, Mom, I won't tell Dad, but you have to be honest with me. How can I trust you otherwise?" Then Mom revealed the truth that shocked me to my core. She told me that the boy I had just seen was none other than her son, Arslan, my half-brother. She explained that before marrying Dad, she had been married to her cousin, Kamran. They had been very happy, and from that marriage she had a son, Arslan. After Kamran passed away in an accident, She had to return to her parents' house with little Arslan. Her brother's wife didn't want her there and pressured her to remarry, so she agreed to marry Dad, who had lost his first wife during childbirth. But Dad's condition was clear. He wouldn't marry unless Arslan became her son too. My mom was forced to give up her own son, Arslan, and leave him with her brother's family, and she came to live with Dad. She said, I never got over Kamran's death, and I couldn't bear losing Arslan. But I couldn't show my grief to anyone. I raised you as my own daughter, Grace. You were small and needed a mother, and I had no children of my own. I hid my sorrow and my son's absence behind a smile for years. Mom explained that Dad didn't want to have children with her because she was still grieving Arslan, but she never shared that pain with me. She gave me a home, a life, and raised me with love. But deep down, she longed to see her son Arslan again. The loneliness in her heart had never gone away, but she kept it hidden. Even though she'd moved on from her own grief, she couldn't forget the son she had lost. It was only now, after 10 years of keeping this secret, that I was learning the truth. She said, I never told you about Arslan because I feared that if your father knew I was meeting him, he would leave me. I kept it a secret because I wanted to keep our family together. I sat there stunned. My whole world had shifted. The boy I had seen in Mom's room, Arslan, wasn't just any boy. He was my half-brother, and he had been secretly meeting my mom for years. As Mom sobbed, I held her hands tightly, saying, Mom, I promise I won't tell Dad. I understand why you did it, but you have to let Arslan be a part of our lives. It's time that you, both of you, stop hiding in the shadows. That's why he went abroad and started his life there. One reason he never returned was that whenever he came back, he would see your mother's face and feel the pain of the past. He stayed away from you because in your face, he saw the face of his first wife. I raised you as my own, Grace. I never let you feel the absence of your real mother. I never even told you that I wasn't your biological mother. But the grief of not having my own child weighed heavily on me. And then one day, suddenly, 16-year-old Arslan appeared at my doorstep. I recognized him immediately. He looked just like Kamran, but I was scared because of your father, and Arslan decided on his own that he would secretly visit me every night for a brief while. I wanted to stop Arslan, but my motherly instincts took over, and I started meeting him, forgetting all the promises and conditions I had made. I never told you about this because I thought it would cause you a lot of pain. You always believed me to be your real mother, and I was afraid that if your father found out about Arslan, he would leave me forever. Arslan wasn't just anyone. He was my son, and he came to meet me secretly. The neighbors found out about this, and they misunderstood, creating rumors and gossiping about us. Mom sat on the floor at my feet, crying and begging me not to tell my father. I took her hands in mine and said, Mom, I could never imagine you were not my real mother. You have loved me more than any biological mother would. It was your right to keep Arslan with you. Dad should have understood that. I won't tell Dad anything, but how long will you keep hiding your son? It would be better if you accept Arslan as your son in front of the world and try talking to Dad about it. After all these years, Dad should understand. I reassured Mom that I was with her. I urged her to speak to Dad, to let Arslan be a part of our family. After much persuasion, Mom finally spoke to Dad about Arslan. I also insisted that Dad give a place to Arslan in our home. In the end, Dad, sitting in a foreign country, agreed. After years of separation, he finally accepted Arslan as his stepson. Mom was overjoyed. She hugged me tightly and promised that she would never let me feel any less loved. Now, Arslan lives with us. The neighbors know about it, so their curiosity has subsided. But sometimes I wonder how selfish men can be. They do everything they can to ensure that their children don't feel the absence of their mother. That's why my father kept Arslan away from my mother and their family. The question I want to ask is this: will a woman always have to suffer in this society? Will the unfairness continue? I need an answer to this question.